The final genre that we haven't looked at yet is the genre that we call the apocalyptic literature. And so we find that both in the New Testament and literature outside the New Testament that's mentioned, the apocryphal literature. And to that we turn next. So let's pull up our PowerPoint for that as we share that now. So Jewish apocalypse and apocalyptic literature is actually developed during earlier eras. We see it actually during the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, and then during the Hellenistic or Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire. We actually find the various developments during that time. So the apocalyptic genre is quite different. We see that it is often presented in a narrative framework, so in story format. And it's kind of characterized by seeing otherworldly beings. So a revelation, some disclosure is being given, mediated to an otherworldly being, and then to a human recipient. And then it's kind of shown in some sort of otherworldly reality. And that's both in the here and out somewhere in a temporal, spatial place. So Jewish apocalyptic, we see Jewish apocalyptic books. That's somewhere between 200 BCE and 100 CE. During the intertestamental period, a lot of this was produced, and they typically were produced under different names. We call it pseudonymity. And we have some examples of those outside the Old Testament, outside the Hebrew Bible. Examples are the book of Enoch, the fourth book of Ezra, the Assumption of Moses, the Ascension of Isaiah, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and so on and so forth. Here's, for example, a well-known one called First Enoch. Look at this, and you see names of archangels, and these are the names of the holy angels. Who was Uriel, one of the holy angels who's over the world and over Tartarus, which is the netherworld. Raphael, one of the holy angels who's over the spirits of men. Raguel, one of the holy angels who takes vengeance on the world of the luminaries. Michael, and he's mentioned in the Bible, one of the holy angels to wit. He that is set over the best part of mankind and over chaos. Saraquel, one of the holy angels who is set over the spirits, who sin in the spirit. Gabriel, we see that one in the New Testament, right? One of the holy angels who is over paradise and the serpent and the cherubim. Ramiel, one of the holy angels whom God set over those who rise. And then we see some other talk about it. Talks about things that were chaotic. And we see other world. I see neither a heaven nor a firmly founded earth, but some other things there. Uriel speaks up. And so we get kind of a feel for what's going on there. Here's an example from the Ascension of Isaiah. This is rather graphic when you look at that picture, when somebody is sawn in two. Notice how it travels through different layers of another world. He took me into the air of the seventh heaven, different layers of heaven. And moreover, I heard a voice saying, how far will he ascend? That dwelleth in the flesh. Look how it mentions the Lord Jesus Christ. So in verse 4, he said, he who forbade thee is he who is over the praise giving of the sixth heaven. So you go from sixth to the seventh. And he who permitted thee, this is thy Lord, the Lord Christ, who will be called Jesus in the world. And so it talks about ascending to different levels. So other apocalyptic books outside of the New Testament. So the New Testament has the Revelation or Apocalypse of John. We also know the Apocalypse of Peter and the Apocalypse of Paul. And an early list of New Testament books, those were mentioned. We also have the Shepherd of Hermas, one of the early collections of the Old Testament, the Codex Sinaiticus, actually has a copy of that attached, and the church was really into that. Here you see an example of the Apocalypse of Peter, the Coptic example of that. And rather than having a journey into heaven, they have a journey into hell. And I saw another place, 21, over against that one, over against a place of righteous men. And it was very squalid. It was a place of punishment. And they that were punished and the angels that punished them had their raiment dark, according to the air of the place. There's some there that were hanging by their tongues, and that's what they that were blasphemed the way of righteousness. And under them was laid fire, flaming and tormenting them. And there was a great lake full of flaming mire. That reminds you of something that we see in chapter 20 of the book of Revelation in the New Testament. Verse 24, and there were also others, women, hanged by their hair above that mire, which boiled up. And these were they that adorned themselves for adultery. And the men that were joined with them in the defilement of adultery were hanged by their feet and had their heads hidden in the mire. So kind of unpleasant, but believe it or not, the early Jesus followers actually liked this book. So we find them in a lot of churches. The Apocalypse of Paul, again, written under a pseudonym, not written by Paul. He travels into the third heaven, and the angel brought me down to the third heaven and led me into the second heaven. Notice how they travel between this. Talks about an ocean. And suddenly I came out of heaven and perceived that it is the light of the heaven that shineth upon the earth. Interesting, right? That talks about Christ reigning for 1,000 years, just like you find in the Apocalypse of John. So it's clear here, right, that the revelation of John, as we have in the New Testament, is by no means unique. They had a lot of these kind of writings. So the genre, it's known for having otherworldly journeys, otherworldly beings. And so it was very familiar to people in the first century. It's just not familiar to us. Other apocalyptic writings in the early church, like I mentioned, is quite frequently found. So Apocrypha. Apocrypha are those writings that did not end up in the Bible, but the church was favorable to a lot of them, like First Enoch and the Assumption of Moses, Gospel of Thomas, Testament of Moses, Acts of Paul. There's some books that we ascribe to Paul, and one of them it describes Paul's ending. Paul is being beheaded. And then when they chop off Paul's head, milk comes out of his veins. So it's very interesting. Okay, now let's look at the backgrounds for writings such as First Peter and Second Peter and Jude. And the book of Enoch actually may very well play a role in forming the background to it, because all three of these books deal with judgment. That's very much a Jewish theme, right? We're talking about Jewish books still here. And this is very similar to what you find in books like the Book of Enoch. So let's take a look at that. In Jude 6, now Jude is a very tiny letter, so we just give numbers because it's only one chapter. Notice how in the book of Jude, it says this: and the angels who did not keep their own position, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains in deepest darkness for the judgment of the great day. This is actually in the book of Jude. When you go to the book of Enoch, and you can actually click on this link if you want to in the PowerPoint, it will actually take you to that on the internet. You can find these on the internet. It says the watchers are bound by the archangel Michael and are placed under darkness, under the earth until the day of judgment. That actually describes this. So this is like overlap. It's actually quoting from the book of Enoch. And notice how it talks about being kept underneath the earth. They believe that the earth was a flat pancake, and underneath it, there were like caves and areas where angels and evil beings were bound. A few verses later in Jude, it says that when the archangel Michael contended with the devil and disputed about the body of Moses, he did not dare bring a condemnation of slander against him, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." And this is actually found in another writing, the Assumption of Moses. And now here's a little picture, and you see this angel fighting with the evil one over the body of Moses, and it's like, whoa. Well, it's very interesting because it expands on a story in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament. And if you are a person that knows Bible trivia or knows the Old Testament, the question would be, what happened to Moses? Moses is a great character in the story of the Old Testament. This is a Jewish book, and the Jewish people greatly respected Moses as the bringing of God's law. But what happened when Moses died? What happened to his body? Well, Moses led the people out of confinement, out of Egypt, and then the people wandered through to the desert, and they were supposed to enter into a land that God had for them. And he took the people up on a great mountain, and then he was not allowed to bring them in there. So God himself buries him on a mountain. It doesn't say anything of the stuff that it says here. That's in the Apocrypha. So the book of Jude that we do have in the New Testament quotes from books outside the New Testament, and it picks up on this kind of mythology. This is mythological. These are stories, and they're used as illustrations in the letter of Jude. This is not quoted as like truth. It's not even important to the letter to talk about the body of Moses. No, this is a letter to warn the church that no judgment has taken place yet. Don't listen to weird teachers that say that and say, yo, judgment has already kind of spiritually taken place, therefore you live however you wish to live. This is actually just an illustration. Just like if you listen to a speaker or to a preacher, the preacher may use an example out of football or out of the world of art. And here they were using an example out of the Assumption of Moses. But interestingly, it makes it into our Bible. A little bit later, it says, let's talk about Enoch as an illustration, just like you might give an example of a famous singer. And he says, this is what Enoch said. Well, the interesting thing is that we don't really have a lot of information about this guy, Enoch. He's mentioned in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, just like one sentence. Enoch walked with God and he was no more. But we have these apocryphal writings, and you can click on a link here, and it mentions Enoch in these fantastic sort of writings, and it's quoted from there as a way of illustration. So these apocryphal writings are used in letters to get the point across to the people of God. Just like Paul used stuff when he was talking about things in Athens, right? He quoted from the poets there. And here we're quoting from writings that the Jewish people would have liked. Very interesting. Now you know.